I remember my dad coming home from his second factory job and finding somehow, Hilda, I had climbed over the rope and stanchion that my mother put in the living room, protecting our plastic covered couch.
Oh,
and
yeah, the plastic covered couch stuff.
And there I was eating Nutella. And, my dad said, go get a job. And I said, Dad, I'm freaking 10 years old.
From Six Story, I'm your producer, Diana Hong, and you're listening to Rev Up Your Potential with Hilda Gann, the show where we talk with entrepreneurs in Toronto about the stories behind their success and the lessons they've learned along the way. And now your host, Hilda Gann.
Hilda Gann, Rev Up Your Potential, the podcast for entrepreneurs who learn through stories. Today, you'll hear the successes and struggles of the CEO and president of the United Way. I've asked Daniele to join me because he is an entrepreneur in many, many ways, and I think you'll love hearing his stories. So Daniele, for those who don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So good to be with you, Hilda. After so many years of you volunteering, it's good to see you. Good to be on your podcast. United Way, as you know, is the largest funder of social services next to government. I started with a master's degree in social work, began working grassroots organizations in North Etobicoke, in Rexdale, worked with the region of York at the government. And then I got pulled into the magic of United Way that brings together business, labor, agencies, and residents. And it was there that all of the moments of my storytelling, my desire to make impact, and my desire to drive growth really crystallized. And so I became CEO of United Way York Region. You, of course, were not only a member of our volunteer cabinet, you were a member of our board of directors. We made a bold decision, Hilda, to merge with United Way Toronto at the time, and we led that merger. And today we find ourselves an amalgam of York, Peel, and Toronto, United Way Greater Toronto, the largest United Way in the world.
Amazing. You are an amazing person who gives and has been giving for much of your life. And I think you inspire others through your storytelling. And so it was very important for me to invite you. And you're such a busy person, so I am so glad that you are my guest today. So let's just, you talked about this spirit of giving and desire to give, starting off as getting your master's in social work and then sharing with us how you've built yourself up to be United Way CEO president of the largest in the world. Can we take you back to where in that journey is that spirit of giving? Does it start in childhood and adolescence? Where does that start from, Daniele?
There's a beautiful saying that there's never one story, there's many stories. So when I think about who I am, currently a white male settler, privileged, sitting in the CEO role, I rewind all the way back to little Daniele, the only kid on my street with a vowel at the end of their name. Both my parents working 2 jobs to make ends meet. My childcare was my uncle Frank, who was a janitor at the Toronto District School Board by night. And at 7 a.m, he would show up with his Pontiac Parisienne and be my daycare during the day. And so you learn very quickly a few things. The power of family and networks. As a young Italian kid, I also learned the discipline of working hard. I remember my dad coming home from his second factory job and finding somehow, Hilda, I had climbed over the rope and stanchion that my mother put in the living room, protecting our plastic covered couch.
Oh, yeah, the plastic covered couch stuff.
And there I was eating Nutella. And, my dad said, go get a job. And I said, Dad, I'm freaking 10 years old. But even then, go cut grass, go get wooden posts so that we can use them for the tomatoes in the backyard. And he would give me 25 cents for every stick. The discipline of working hard as a kid never really leaves. And then another moment, I think my mom and aunt pulled me out of grade 1. I'll never forget, I was having my mortadella sandwich with provolone cheese, and the door knocked and they said, Daniele, can you come out? And next thing you know, I'm on a plane going to Italy. My grandfather was passing away.
Mm-hmm.
We get to the hospital in Aquila, this province, in the middle of the night. My mom and aunt are busy going to their father's side. And my mom turns around and she can't find me. And the story is, and I don't remember, but the story is, there I was sitting next to this old, dying, frail gentleman, holding his hand, asking him, how are you? Where do you come from? And this combo of work hard and care never really left. You know, I went through university. I got a job at Progress Place, a clubhouse for people with severe mental health challenges. And that really changed my life because it was a Thursday night. I was staffing the hotline, which unfortunately was the line people called when they were in crisis or suicidal. And I got a call from a voice that I thought I recognized, but I wasn't sure. He walked me through his emotion. He told me he was feeling suicidal. I asked all the right questions, and then I asked him his name, and it all came. I had gone to high school with this young man. And it was at that moment, Hilda, that I realized in life there really is no us and them. It's just us. And I had to dedicate my life to changing the world. And so it started me on my master's program. It continued my passion for storytelling. You can't grow up an Italian Canadian kid without storytelling. And it drove me right into United Way. And I think those are the pieces that really, when I think about why I'm here and why I'm driving growth in a certain way, it's this series of moments. A final comment, maybe, Hilda, and I think it's important. You know, I spoke to you about my Uncle Frank, and in grade 1, Miss Quinn told us we were going to have show and tell. And she said, bring in your best toy. And so I barely knew a word of English, but I heard all the kids in the recess playground saying they were bringing in Superman or Barbie or Wonder Woman. And I was thinking, Italians don't have plastic figurines. So I jumped into my Uncle Frank's car when he came to pick me up. And I said, Zio, I need a toy. I need something. He's like, don't worry. The next morning, we stole my mom's St. Francis of Assisi plastic figurine that was on her nightstand. And it had holy water in it. So we put it into my knapsack. I get in the car. And my Uncle Frank told me, remember, best story wins. Start at the end. I go into class. Miss Quinn calls me up. I take the top off of St. Francis's head and I spray the kids with the holy water. And I say, miracle, miracle. Suffice to say, I won show and tell. But it was the moment where I really learned best stories win.
Wow.
And we do it now in all of our work.
Wow. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Like when I was trying to decide what I wanted to do for a career, I thought, I don't want to be a business person. I don't know how to sell. I don't want to force myself on anybody. And then fast forward to when my husband and I have our company, iTrans. And then I'm thinking, wait a minute. I sell all the time. I sell an idea to the staff. I sell an idea to a client. I sell, I try to get people to join our company and tell them how good it is. Like, I am selling all the time now.
All the time, my friend.
And it is about stories. It's stories that really resonate with people. it's not what you say, it's how people feel from the stories. And I know, Daniele, when you've told stories so many times, it just touches the heart, and you may not remember the exact words, but you remember the feeling. And I think that's what you do when you share stories. You share feelings. I love that thing that your uncle said, you remember, wins. So here you are bringing a plastic figure that's a holy thing, and yet you beat out Barbie and Superman. All
But
this.
the beauty of that story is the tail end, which is I jump back into his Pontiac Parisian, having one show and tell. I sneak St. Francis back into my mother's nightstand at 3:30 when I get home from school. That night, I'm lying in bed. I hear my mother screaming, "Miracolo," which is miracle
Oh,
in
right.
Italian.
Okay.
I run into the bedroom. She's on her knees praying. My dad's like, "Pina, what happened?" She said, "I swear to you, St. Francis was only half full, but now I've opened him. He's completely full." The reason there was a miracle is after I won, I filled St. Francis up at the school tap just to make sure he was full. The stories of, and when I look back at my career, Hilda, when I look, whether I was in at Progress Place, whether I was at the Region of York, Rexdale Community Health Center, or United Way, the consistent thing that I've done is tell stories. And, one of my other summer jobs, beautiful work, Chin Radio, writing 30-second commercials for, you name it, Leon's, the local Italian butcher, the Bay, whatever the customer was. And you learn the magic of storytelling throughout your career. It doesn't matter what job you're in. We are all natural storytellers, and we all want to belong in the story. So the magic of the story is making people feel they belong in it.
So, Daniele, what is the secret to telling a story that identifies the need? Because you could be a great storyteller, but if you can't reach the audience, if you don't know what they want or need, that just might just go choom, like who cares? So what is it about you when you're crafting a story that understands what that listener needs? In other words, helping entrepreneurs think, what kind of story do I tell to connect with my potential client or my existing client so that we build a stronger relationship together?
I'm obsessed with hope. And I'm obsessed with practical, lived experiences of people. I never tell the story about United Way, 200 staff, raise 100. I tell very specific stories of Daewoo, who wakes up every morning at 3:50 a.m., the 27th floor of a building in North Etobicoke, and pens a note to her 10-year-old daughter that says, "Remember to give grandpa his meds at 8 a.m. Remember to get your brother online at 2 p.m. for his mental health counseling program. Remember, the volunteers from the hub are coming in the afternoon with our food delivery. And remember to do your homework. Love, Mom." And then by 4:50, she's on the bus to her first job. And at 3:30, she walks to her second job and gets home at 10 o'clock, enough to tuck in her 94-year-old father, sit with her 18-year-old son, and ask how the voices in his head are doing, and then give her 10-year-old daughter a big thank you hug. That's the story that people want to hear about others in their neighborhood and the impact we can make when we work together. They don't want to hear about all the mechanics of United Way and the organization.
No, it's the stories that make a difference. And as we talked earlier, I wanted to share my story because we believed in United Way. And when I think back on it, like when our company was about 25 people, I said, we have enough people now that people can hide behind. If they don't want to give, nobody will notice, kind of. When you're 10, you can say, hey, you didn't give it, you didn't give. But at 25, you can kind of be a little bit more anonymous. And I always wanted to give back. Tyrone and I built our business, and when you're first starting out, you just got to try to survive, right? But at some point you get to a point in your business, and we did, where we want to give back, and giving back means giving back to your community. The community to us meant our geographical and our professional community. So being an engineer company, we did things to give back to the engineering community. But for local, we were in York Region, and both of us agreed United Way. And when I think back on it, it was an amazing journey. Your campaign was something that created fun for our company, and it was our major team building event every year. People looked forward to our fundraising, and then we had a matching program and the generosity of our staff. But then when I think about it, why did we choose United Way? Why United Way? And I lost my father when I was 10, and we didn't have a lot of money. And there was my mother, a single parent with a mother-in-law to take care of, and 3 children, 12 and under at the time of my dad's death. But there wasn't United Way that I knew of. And certainly I didn't have money to go take a part in a class that was funded by United Way. So I really don't remember needing those services to say, hey, I want to give back to United Way. But what I do remember is being in high school and us fundraising. And so that's fun. I'm kind of a fun person. So that was fun to do that. And then it felt really, really good to raise money for a cause. So as we reflect back on our company, then I think that good feeling of giving back, and that knowing through the current research at the time, is that United Way was well run, and that the amount of money that was going to, administration was one of the lowest. So, and the thing I loved about it was this one-stop shopping. I knew that you would find the money to give to the right causes, and those that were raising them, doing their due diligence to keep that money, in a way, and being on the financial side on one of the subcommittees that year. There was so much community service to United Way. I think I was almost part staff, but to be part of that, you guys were laughing at me. Hilda, you're still here. I said, yeah, I know. That particular year, I was part of the funding, and we getting to see how the money was decided upon was really eye-opening for me. So yeah, I've been a strong supporter of United Way, and really loved what you have done for United Way in the GT area.
But what you've touched on so many components, Hilda, that no matter how much the research says it, people are better. We're all better when we belong to something.
Yeah.
A family, a network, a community.
Mm-hmm.
We're all better when we're loved, when we're cared for. And there's all kinds of proof that, as painful as giving your time or your resources are, you actually, as the donor, get as much or more satisfaction than the person receiving that contribution. And so I think it's important that we start to see philanthropy, or from its meaning, etymology, love of humanity, as it lifts us all. It is not something that we do for others. It's what we do because we're united. And if COVID has taught us anything, it's that we are in this together. Yeah. We've seen in so many neighborhoods across the GTA the power of residents, community ambassadors who have done door knocking, telephone trees, WhatsApp networking, Facebook, to reach out to our most vulnerable and get them into vaccine sites, make sure they've got food. That outpouring of care and that generosity that we get from each other makes us all better. It actually is good for business. And so, we also often talk about philanthropy or nonprofit, and then we talk about the for-profit. They're really all interconnected because you can't have one without the other. And I also want to be very clear for many of the listeners and those that have been with Revved Up for so long and hearing this through, all of the principles are applicable in the charitable philanthropy world because at the core, we have a budget, we have a business model, and we have got to grow that business model if we want to help Daewoo and her family get through another day.
See, and this is where you bring it back to the individual. You are connecting us with somebody that is important, that we can resonate with. Because I think sometimes as business owners, we talk about, trying to sell something, but we don't connect it to bring it down to its grassroots. And when you do that, when you give examples, that's when it resonates even more.
And I think too, Hilda, like every big decision we make in business, every big decision we make as servant leaders, and I think it's important, I always look in the mirror and the first person I see is the homeless individual where we're trying to get resources to, or Daewoo and her family that I've mentioned. So all of our decisions, all of my decisions in business transformation, in mergers, in staff changing and cultural transformation is driven by that person in the mirror at the center of the work, not the United Way, not the donors, but ultimately, who are we here for? And if I can be crystal clear every morning of that, then I've got extreme clarity on every decision I make, why we merge, why we are moving into more digital work, why we're broadening the base of our collaborations to look at affordable housing with partners like the University Health Network and the City of Toronto, because it's always singularly focused on, is this going to help drive more resources to that person in your neighborhood?
Yeah. And I think this speaks to your business sense and your growth of business sense. Because you talked about it's the stories, it's about I care. You may well have been happy to do that at the grassroots level, one-on-one with a person. But somehow you decided to take this into a role where you were influencing many, to be a manager, to be a CEO. And that can take you away from the very essence of people that you connect with and care for. How did you decide that I need to be at this level rather than Daniele would be so happy with 20, 50 clients, helping them, be better, to be happier or safer or, have a shelter at night to sleep in. Was that the Daniele that should have been versus the Daniele that's a CEO making these changes? Just a question.
No, I told you about my Uncle Frank, janitor at the Toronto District School Board by night, daycare for me. So he was also a handyman at a couple of apartments at Keele and Lawrence in North York. So we get a call from Mrs. Square, and she says, Frank, there's a flood in the basement. We drive over, there's water everywhere in the basement, and there's a bunch of people throwing towels on the floor. And I grab a couple of towels. And my Uncle Frank says, go turn off the main water valve. At some point in Daniele's journey, going through my master's program, working in neighborhoods, I realized we were not going to solve deep social issues by only throwing towels on issues, homelessness, mental health, substance abuse, gender-based violence. We needed to look at the root causes of poverty, income inequality, racism. So you have to be both throwing towels and somebody's got to get their hand on the main valve.
Yeah.
And when I landed at United Way, it was the first time, Hilda, I felt it was a sandbox for corporate labor agencies, residents to all come together to make those immediate and long-term changes. And so I think part of my journey has been figuring out, and it's not been linear. It's never linear.
Yeah.
It's always taking moments, and you're often guided by opportunities, but finding yourself in a place where you think, I can make the most difference here for now. And then being really stubborn about making those changes. And sometimes it means really tough choices, whether to merge or not. Sometimes it means tough conversations with some of our partners about the impact of systemic racism for our Black community or the Indigenous community. But if you take yourself out of the equation and you focus on what is the problem we're trying to solve, I think you can have those conversations.
Yeah. I think that as a person, you need to step back and say, what is my passion and how do I make an impact? And I think the first time I was a manager, my boss said, Hilda, if you think you're ready for a director role, I think you are. And I thought, who's thinking of a director role? I was still in my 30s. Who's thinking of a director role? Okay. So I did apply for it. And what I realized was I don't just get to influence a few people. I get to influence managers who will then influence people. And I think the same thing happened when I decided to start People Bright Consulting. I thought, okay, I can go and work for another company after my husband and I sold ours. And that helped that company, build a really positive work culture, have a strong HR foundation. And I did that. And then I realized you can do that. Every 3 years, try to do it for another company, but that's not going to help. What you need to do, Hilda, if you want to really have an impact on creating stronger workplaces, you need to start your own company and you need to help people. So it is like now I have this visual of go turn off the main valve. That's the idea, is that sometimes you need to step back as an entrepreneur and say, what am I going to do that's going to make the most impact? And for me, like you're thinking, is sometimes you need to think about strategic partners. Who are those people that you can partner with to then create more influence and support in this world?
I also don't know, Hilda, like as I'm listening to you, it's so fascinating to hear the narrative of how you've emerged as a leader. And in some cases, we're kind of thrown into it. And I think about, I don't know if I formally received training in leadership. I think it is far more structured now. It is far more intentional now.
Yeah.
I don't know, as I was coming through the ranks, if it was so formal. But here's what I do know. I was extremely vulnerable. I was never, and maybe in error, I was never afraid to say, I don't know. And today, in the midst of COVID, in the midst of the reckoning that we're all going through around racism, I have heard more CEOs and leaders talk about, I don't know, as an authentic starting point. And so I do think we're also getting into a new style of leadership, which is not the leader as the be all and know all, but actually the leader as servant, the leader as enabler, the leader as listener. And those are fundamentally different skills.
Definitely, like the leaders of the 50s and 60s, the leaders of the 70s and 80s, and the leaders today different needs and different wants. And I've got some new members on my team right now, and working with them. And I said, so, I've got a new executive assistant, and I want to develop the relationship. So I said, so given what you've heard over the last couple of weeks, what do you think? She says, well, you're more of a collaborative leader. You want to build a strong team, and you're listening, and you're so flexible in how you do things, right? And I'm going, yeah, and I think that you're right, Danielle. I think the leaders of tomorrow don't have all the answers. I mean, this world is so full of expertise. Go to Google if you want to find out how to do stuff, right? But there's no way that any one leader can be an expert in everything. But a strong leader knows the questions to ask, and knows to find people that will help build a strong team together. Before we end, I really, want to talk to you about some of the things that all of us as business owners are faced right now. This is the time. It's the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter, the fact that the LGBTQ2 is really getting some ears, that people are now listening. My husband started saying, what's with they and them and she and her? Like, how am I supposed to use it, or what am I supposed to say? Because he doesn't know. It's not that he doesn't want to, but he wants to learn. And then this whole thing with Indigenous. Tell us your thoughts, particularly maybe some, guidance for us as leaders to figure out what should we be doing, not doing. I know I have my own HR bent on it, but I want to hear it from you, because you're out there, you're connected, and you're trying to create programs and connectivity with organizations that far do more in this way than us who are business owners. But share.
I am indeed, Hilda, out there. I'm in the community, and yet I want to be crystal clear. I'm also a white male settler who's in the CEO seat of United Way, who has immense privilege. And so I defer any wisdom that I might bring. And I have, in fact, turned outward to listen more intently to people with lived experience, to whether it's colleagues, whether it's other leaders, agency members, on what is their voice, not to give my opinion, but rather to listen and reflect back. And I think that is part of the fundamental shift of I don't know. It's also part of, I think, a shift in leadership. If in the past, part of leadership was command and control, I think right now it's inverted to enabling.
Yes.
And I think we have got to build a new and different civic muscle amongst our employees, amongst our customers, where they feel safe to comment on whether it's a customer problem or, more importantly, a societal problem. And gone are the days, I think, where you could separate business from community, or social justice and charity.
Yeah.
I think they're all combined. And so I'm far more hesitant to opine on what we can do or how we should do it, and to listen. What I will say is, going through my career, I've had different moments. I got into social work believing that we could change the world through good intentions and programming. I got into philanthropy believing if we could just raise more money. Now I've realized we're going to need to social service, fundraise, and civic muscle our way out of this. And what that means is, for any of your listeners, part of their leadership is going to have to mean rolling up their sleeves and getting involved in their community. You can't be a good business. You can't be a good leader if you are not not immersed in your community.
Yeah.
Whether that's your professional community, your geographic community, your cultural community. And so I think those are important concepts. And you can't be a leader who jumps onto panels or podcasts with all these opinions. Like any good storyteller, you almost have to float on top of the story, watch it, and then retell it in a way that you see it. And you have to acknowledge that's the way you see it. But Hilda might be watching the same story and it might be completely different.
Since our eyes have awakened to, Me Too and Indigenous people and the gay community, then what we realize is, no, it's not how you want to be treated, it's how they want to be treated. So when you want to look at people and level the playing field, treating them as equals, seeing their unique experiences, then it is about listening. It's about hearing what they need and what their voices are. I remember when I was in nursing school and we learned about how people who were Black had higher blood pressure. They seemed to, so there were all of these diseases that they got. And it wasn't clear to me whether it was genetic or it was geographical, being in the community they were. And as I grow up and I realize that, parents with young teenage boys are very anxious when they've all of a sudden say, hey, I want to get my driver's license, because they realize they might get pulled over and that they've got to make sure they're very respectful when they're pulled over, etc. So I suddenly realized in talking to some of my friends that their lives were one where they can't go out and feel that they're on high alert mode, because they don't know if somebody's going to do something, that they're going to be stopped or they're going to be bullied or harassed. So their life is one full of anxiety. So no wonder why there is, high blood pressure. And suddenly I realized I wish that the young nurse back then, and maybe we didn't know that when I was a young nurse, understood the kind of environment some of us are being brought up in. And this is creating, situations that lead to problems of greater society.
But just like the day, Hilda, the day that we're recording this podcast, it's a rainy day in the Greater Toronto. It's cloudy. I think we need to acknowledge, we as a GTA, we as a country, maybe we globally, are in a moment of reckoning. And we are acknowledging the systemic and structural issues that underlie so many of the problems and tensions, so many of the traumas that many have experienced for decades.
Yes.
But with that acknowledgement, there's a few shifts we've got to make. Number one, I think we have to acknowledge that it doesn't matter how many programs United Way runs. It doesn't matter. Agency has got to be given to people. People have got to decide what they need. And so this concept of we're going to give money or run a little program for a community is not going to work. It actually has to be led by that community. It's a fundamental shift. And so I think that, leaders have to use that same paradigm of how am I walking with customers? How am I walking with community? And it's fundamentally different in business than it is in community work. Because in business, look, you make a pair of shoes. It's a good pair of shoes. If it gets sold, great. If it doesn't, when we talk about charity, when we talk about United Way, we are solving the deepest human issues. And we've got to come at it not as a market response, but as a love response. And that's a very different story.
It's a kinder story. And I think it would make people understand better the situations. And I would also challenge the idea that it's not just in the community, it's in your workplaces.
Yes.
Because for every person that you've dealt with, some of them actually work. I mean, that woman that went to work, wouldn't it be nice for her to go to a workplace where she didn't have any other stresses than she has at home. She's not bullied, or she's not, she's not bullied by a boss who's really not caring. So I think it behooves us as business leaders to create a work environment that will be open to diversity, to including people. I often will say to my clients, it's fine to have, beliefs, but don't have your mission, vision, and values on the wall. Don't have your diversity in a box, on the bookshelf. Make it a living, breathing element of your company. And when you do that, it'll be a greater place to work. It'll be a sense of belonging. And if for those of people who are profit minded, when people enjoy what they do and they love what they do, that's going to increase sales. That's going to increase profit. It's going to increase productivity, and people are going to stay, which also then saves you money because you're not trying to turn over people and hire people. So in some ways, what you're saying, those elements happen in the workplace too. And as strong leaders, you may not realize that maybe 10% of your staff are using United Way supports, who need this job, but they're also trying to manage. And I think in COVID times, so many of us are a little bit more sensitive to the fact that people were trying to manage their elders, manage their children. All of a sudden they were educators and elder care people and workers. And, cooking, I cook for 5 people. I'm getting tired of cooking.
But it's so true. We're also seeing you in your home environment for the first time. So we have partners walking by, pets walking by. And I think it's important, Hilda, to state the only way we're going to move from the clouds to some sun collectively out of this series of pandemics that we're in, because it's not only the COVID, it's all of the mental health, racism.
Yes.
We have to start in our own shop. At United Way, as a leader at United Way, I have to listen to the voice first of our 200 plus staff.
Mm-hmm.
We've done engagement surveys. We've done diversity and inclusion surveys. But this last July 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, I think we had our most honest, transparent, and authentic diversity and inclusion survey, where many people in our organization said, I don't feel like I can move up in this organization. I don't feel seen in this organization. And as a leader, that's the hardest thing to hear and listen and work on. And yet now it means we've got to review all of our policies. We've got to review how are we supporting each other internally before we start talking about this in the community with our agencies and partners. And it also plays out in some tough discussions we've had, maybe some tough discussions listeners to your podcast are having about, during COVID times, the importance of paid sick leave and emergency leave for people.
Yeah.
You can't have a healthy workplace, you can't have healthy community if people continue to be in precarious jobs where they don't have an ability to take care of themselves and their families. And so we've worked with government, we've worked with businesses on how we can move that discussion forward. It's not always easy, but sometimes even as leaders, you have to think, what can I do in my own shop with my policies, with my organization, and then ripple that out to others in the industry. Yeah. If you think about your and Tyrone's time, you modeled some excellent engagement behavior that you were then able to talk to other construction, other engineering firms about, and that they might take that on as well. That's part of leadership, showing and telling a new way of doing things.
Right. Yeah. That's just we've touched a lot of heavy conversation here.
We do indeed. Good stories allow you to do that and not even know that you're doing it, Hilda.
I do want to ask how United Way pivoted during COVID, and and it's twofold. You as an organization, but also, thinking about us who are givers and supporters of United Way, when we're on hard times, we can't give as generously as we would like to give. So have you felt that in during these COVID times, and how have you pivoted to this situation? So just share what you have done as an organization to adapt, pivot during COVID.
I think two big questions. On the one side, I think what we did organizationally to pivot, and then I think the second one is around the donor. On the first one, we completely empowered all components of our staff, all components of our agencies and our network. So for example, on that dreaded day when everybody went into our first lockdown, our staff all working from home, they were completely empowered to drive their work and their business as they saw fit. And of course, there's mechanisms and processes. But when you give people agency over their work, they step up. We also empowered all of our frontline agencies. We fund 280 agencies across Peel, Toronto, and York. And when COVID hit, we said, we're giving you complete flexible funding. You take those dollars and use them where you see fit. So a seniors program that used to do congregate dining, overnight, they prepared, planned, and delivered hundreds of thousands of meals to drive out to isolated seniors. Or some of our mental health agencies that were doing face-to-face counseling, they had to pivot to crisis counseling by telephone or by Zoom, where within seconds, a suicidal kid gets access to a psychiatrist. So that's a fundamental difference of leadership. Pivoting meant completely empowering and giving control and trust to those on the front line. And it worked beautifully and seamlessly, Hilda. And I don't ever want to return to the command and control and the bureaucracy that we had in the past, because we saw it worked on the front line.
Even as you're saying that, a sense of autonomy and a sense of ability to free people to do what it takes to get the job done. And I can see how that could have resulted in some really, really, excellent solutions to the emergent needs that kept changing and evolving, right? And I can't help but think, so in conversations with some clients and others, hearing, well, I don't know, what are they going to do at home? Will they be working? And then going, have faith, hope, trust that people will be doing this. And later on hearing, 6 months later, they're more productive than they ever been and some great ideas. And so exactly what you're saying is that you need to learn to develop trusting relationships with people. And when you trust and empower them, when you look at that uniqueness that these people have and you empower that potential, that really helps build your business. And I think those companies that allowed people to be more flexible, to exert their own leadership abilities, realize that if I empower my staff and I trust them, this can only help the company in the long run.
I was more concerned. I agree, Hilda. I was more concerned with, would they be able to turn off, or would the lines of home and work be so blurred? People sending emails at midnight and constantly feeling the need to check their computer. Yeah. But you're so right. When we give our staff, when we give our partners, when we give our agencies authority, control, autonomy, they deliver because they know the work best. Our donors responded unbelievably. We had forecast a potential 40% decline in revenue. By the end of the year, we had closed into less than 10%. We had raised well over $100 million that we then put into the community, to our network of agencies. And the reason, again, goes back to the trust. We didn't need, Hilda, to tell any stories during COVID. There was no need for stories in COVID. We were all living the same story.
Yeah,
we were all living the same. We were afraid. So, in the past, we would go into workplaces and talk about United Way. And again, it felt like us and them. But now I didn't need to say anything because everybody on that Zoom call was freaking out about their kids trying to stay in school, worrying about a grandparent or a parent that they had to take care of, freaked about some timeline they had to deliver for work, maybe a partner out of job. Do you know the calls to our distress centers spiked with first-time callers? Maybe people that are listening to the podcast, maybe co-workers in small, medium businesses that never reached out before, calling for the first time to say, I can't cope.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there was no need for stories in COVID. It's just, we need to help, give money. And I think that humanity that emerged, the challenge now will be, how do we sustain that? How do we sustain that uprising of care that has been built?
I think it will peak and then it'll die down. But I think all of us carry with us COVID stories, COVID experience. Mental health was predicted to be the number one disease globally, in 2020. So I'm pretty sure it's going to still be there in 2021 because things have not gone away. And I think there is a lot more compassion and people, as we rise above COVID, and now there's articles on how do you resume, networking and being out there. And sometimes reflexes are, I'm hearing is, because I haven't quite done it yet, reflexes are where you go see somebody, you want to hug them, because you and I are huggers. So you want to instinctively hug them. So now you have to kind of put your hands by your sides for a little while. But I think all of us have got stories and memories. And I think perhaps many more of us are more empathetic to understanding people. And therefore, maybe understanding you in a way I never would have understood you before because I didn't go through something enough that now I know you too have gone through something, and maybe I want to hear your story. Maybe I want to listen to that. So
I believe in that, and I'm hopeful, Hilda, that will be the story. I also will be relentless in reminding people of the often invisible or untold stories that are way below our scurrying around to our jobs or working, of those who are, when we talk about a K recovery, I'm most concerned about the bottom part of the K, who as a result of COVID are deepening in their poverty, are deepening in their lack of housing, will never forget getting out of their parents' basement, will never get into housing, period. And so I think that those are the stories we're going to have to keep centered for people. It's easy to tell stories of people who look and act like us or who are similar to us. I think where we're going to have to really stay is in those who may not be as visible or whose voices don't emerge as clearly.
Right.
And we're seeing the fringes of that in the GTA. The number of people living in tents in parks, the number of people trying to flee gender-based violence, the number of people calling our crisis lines. And so I think it will be a long tail recovery for those most impacted.
Thanks for pointing that part out, because that can be so forgotten and quickly. So, you and I could probably chat all day. What's next? What's next for you and or United Way?
I almost feel that this has rekindled the passion and the commitment to social justice. The very reasons why many of us, whether you're a volunteer or a donor, get into this work. And so I think what's next is a story not about charity, not about a helping hand, but how are we going to create an inclusive community, city, and country that works for all? And that gets at the main water valve, Hilda. That's about precarious jobs. That's about affordable housing. That's about childcare. And so I think that's what's next, telling a new story that is systemic and structural. I don't want to be here in 10 years still talking about we need more programs, we need more philanthropy. I hope we can get to a place where we're dealing with some of these as leaders in business and in community with a different story.
I think that this is a time where people are dialed in, more attuned to wanting to make change. I mean, all of the stuff that has brewed from the pandemic and from these societal things that have been occurring for centuries, we have been heightened by it. And as many protests say, enough talk, let's make action. So I, like you, hopeful that this will result in action. And I think, it's people like you, people like the government, but even people like business owners. We can make a difference in our own geographical area. We can do our part in the businesses we own, in the community that we are part of. So my challenge to people is to really help make a difference, whether it's in your own company that you own or in your community that you're a part of. Help make that difference. We're heightened now and aware, and I think we can do something and make a difference. So thank you, Daniele.
Thank you. We can and we must, Hilda. And it's not a drive-through transaction. Let's write a check. Let's get some volunteers. It has got to be leaders who are in this slow, stubborn, steady walk that we're in together. And we can do it. We really can, especially leaders and friends like you make a big difference.
You are when you talked earlier about, civic action and social and businesses, that's what United Way meant to me. When I sat on the campaign cabinet, when I sat on the board, this was a coming together of the different people, because every campaign, on the board, there was government representation, business leaders, community, and for us to be at the table and to hear each other and the role that we can play. I mean, you are an inspiration, and you bring together those influencers that can help make a difference. So I'm so glad that you came on today. Thank you very much, Daniele. How can people get a hold of you if they'd like to connect with you or United Way?
They can visit our website at unitedwaygt.org, and of course reach out to us by phone. And thanks to you for making this possible and giving us a chance to talk about it.
Well, you were on my list in year one, and I thought, okay, we'll get to it. And then you answered my call for year two, and I'm so glad that you were on our podcast today. So thank you, Daniele. I'd like to thank my co-partners, Six Story, who have been producing the show and do such a fabulous job of that. If you'd like to know more, you can get a hold of them at Six Stories. And I'd like to thank my team back at People Bright Consulting for, helping me get together and find some great talent to talk to you and share stories. And to you, the listeners and the viewers, we're almost near the end of COVID. I've got my second shot, so many people have, and I wish all of you safety. Thank you very much for joining me. And thank you again, Daniele, for being part of our podcast today.
Pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.